My doctors told me this is the end of my youthful life. I would never be able to play with my children the way I want to again. There would be no more running, there would be no more activity, there would be no more fun, there would be no more playing tennis, basketball, running, lifting, jumping, playing, or really doing any of the active activities that I enjoy doing. Those days were over, and I needed to accept that this is the end of the road because I required a hip replacement surgery to alleviate the pain that was destroying my life to the point where I wanted to kill myself because I couldn't live this way anymore. But any notion that I was going to live the way I used to live would be over, and I should be grateful for the good run that I had and accept the fact that I am destined to live the rest of my life as a couch potato. And then they proceeded to tell me a whole long list of other things that I would never be able to do again. And I'd be lying if I told you that I was anything other than completely devastated. I was terrified. And I rejected what they had to say, but I also refused to have the surgery that they recommended because I was so scared. I was completely terrified by the surgery. But before I get into all of that, I think it's important that you understand how I got there. When I was approaching turning 30, I decided that I wanted to get into shape. I wanted to delay getting old. I felt like 30 was a major milestone and I needed to do something different to ensure that I preserved my health, I stayed in good shape, and I didn't get fat. And I felt like running would be the thing that did the trick that kept me youthful, young, and in great shape. And so I started to run. I started to do 5K distance runs. I started to then increase the mileage. And eventually I found myself running marathons and half marathons more and more frequently, which required more and more training and lots of high volume running. And honestly, I became addicted to it. It became my form of therapy and it became a lifestyle. It was a lot of fun and I really enjoyed doing it. And I started to get fast and thin enough to be able to place in my age group as I got faster. And I really started to get competitive within the local groups that are in my area. And no, I was not the fastest, and no, I didn't win all the races. And a lot of times I didn't even place in the top 3, but sometimes I did, and it was a lot of fun. And I made tons of friends, and it turned into my identity in many ways. And eventually I'd throw in other forms of races. I did Spartan, I did a superhero scramble, I did many Ragnars and many trail Ragnars. I did lots of fun things that were all centered around running. And I thought I was giving myself the gift of fitness, and I thought I was giving myself the gift of longevity, which in some ways I probably was. But as I approached 40 years old, I wanted to spice things up a bit. I wanted to challenge myself, and I started to get into doing triathlons. And shockingly, I got bit with the competitive bug, and I started to get obsessed with doing triathlons and getting faster and starting to place in my age and weight division. And because I was doing this with a bunch of friends, I became extremely competitive in trying to beat them. Because I'm a competitive person, I enjoy that. But in all reality, the lessons that I learned is that the only person I'm competing with is myself in any of these races. And so really, I was only trying to improve in each race and beat my previous time. And if I happen to beat my friends in the process, well, then that's just an added bonus. But as I got older and I accumulated a lot more training and I took on a lot more miles and a lot of high volume biking, running, and swimming, I noticed that my body hurt much more than it ever had. And I ignored that pain completely because I assumed that that's just the ante and that's just what happens as you get older. And I learned to tolerate the pain, and I thought that it was just the cost of doing business. And usually what would happen after a long run or a long bike or a long swim is that I would be in incredible pain for a few hours and then it would go away. And after a little bit of recovery and a little rest, I would be back on my feet and doing all the things, living my life the way I always had. But one day while I was running a half marathon, and it was the fastest I had ever run. It was the first time I had ever been in the top group of the race. I was running with the fast people, and it was extremely exciting, and I had worked so hard to be in that position. But I was very likely to be on track to qualify for the Boston Marathon, which was my goal, and I was thrilled that I was running with the fast people. And I remembered when I was at the back or the middle of the pack and I was nowhere near these guys. So I felt special. I felt like I was winning. And about halfway through this race, I got hit with what felt like a lightning bolt right in my hip. It was the most debilitating pain I had ever felt in my life, and it radiated throughout my entire body. It was so bad that I wanted to start crying, but because I was in the lead or in the lead group, I didn't stop running. I kept pushing through the pain. Despite the fact that it felt like my leg was going to fall off, I kept running because I had never been in this position before, and I was terrified to lose it. And as you might expect, the pack left me behind. And it was soul crushing. It was devastating. But I could not endure the pain. I couldn't keep running. And I probably should have stopped running, and I probably should have not continued the race. But because I'm basically a lunatic, I kept going. And I ended up being one of the last people to finish the race. And I didn't run through the finish line. I basically crawled through the finish line. But when that race was over, the pain never went away. And it felt like my entire nervous system was being electrocuted at all times. The pain was radiating through my body, and it refused to stop. In fact, it continued to get worse. And because I'm probably not the brightest bulb that's in the pack, I refused to go to the doctor, despite the fact that I was in tremendous pain. Up until the pain got so bad that I could not ignore it anymore. And so off to the doctor I went. And very quickly, after they reviewed an x-ray, the doctor looked at the x-ray, he turned around and he said, "Chris, you've got the hips of a 90-year-old man. You require a hip replacement surgery as soon as possible." And now, hindsight being 2020, I wish I would have done a lot of things differently at the time, but my instant reaction to his prognosis was that you're looking at the wrong person. This is obviously the wrong x-ray. There's absolutely no way that I would ever need a hip replacement. I am going to qualify for Boston, and I am not going to let anything stand in my way. But what I thought and what I got were two very different things. But I was absolutely in denial, and I refused to have the surgery for a long time. And I made the mistake of going online and Googling what a hip replacement is, where you can find lots of videos of the actual surgery. And I don't recommend anybody do that because it's the most terrifying video you'll ever see. They amputate your femur. It is horrific. It is terrifying. And it looks like it's the end of your youthful life. And it's certainly the end of any type of physical activity, or at least that's what I thought. And so I waited a year up until the pain became so bad that I no longer wanted to live anymore. And that's the honest truth. One day I woke up, my eyes opened, I was still in intense pain that was radiating throughout my body, and I actually said to myself, I'd rather be dead than live this way anymore. But over the course of that year, I was the worst version of myself that I had ever been. I put on a tremendous amount of weight. I was a miserable person at all times. I was constantly angry or irritated or resentful or some other toxic behavior. And it wasn't because I really felt that way. It was because I was in tremendous pain. And if you've ever been in chronic, constant, intense pain, you know exactly how debilitating that it is. And if you have not been in that kind of pain, you probably have no idea what I'm sharing. But trust me, it's life-altering and it's a miserable experience. And I pray to God that you never have to suffer through it. And what I didn't recognize at the time was that my entire identity, or at least a good portion of it, was built around me being an athlete, me being the active, fun dad, me being the guy who does all the fun things and runs around and plays with his kids and runs around and does sports and runs around and does all kinds of fun activities. I've always been extremely active and high energy and love being physically active. And I was convinced that I would never be able to do any of those things again. I was convinced I would never be able to play with my kids again. And the doctors told me I would never be able to do any of those things. But the pain was so immeasurably bad that I recognized that if I did not have the surgery, if I did not take the leap of faith, if I did not do something different, then I'd prefer to be dead because I couldn't live that way anymore. And I'm honestly not saying that to be overly dramatic. I meant it. But when the pain became so bad that I could no longer live with it, I recognized it was either get busy living and get the surgery or get busy dying. And I really didn't want to die. I wanted to be out of pain and I wanted to live. So I had the surgery, and immediately, once I woke up from the anesthesia, once I woke up from the surgery, the first thing that I could tell instantly, the first thing that I said was the pain is gone. And the pain was gone. It was instantly out of my system. I did not feel any more pain. I felt like I was born again. And like any good patient, the first thing I asked the doctor is, how quickly can I get out of this room? How quickly can I get out of this bed? How quickly can I get out of this hospital? How quickly can I get into action and start living my life? And thankfully, I knew enough to listen to the doctor because he quickly told me I need to slow my roll a little bit. But I negotiated some terms with him, which were in compliance with being a good patient. And the deal that we negotiated was, if I could walk around the unit, the entire floor, well, then he would let me go home. But I needed to wait until the anesthesia was out of my system. And when it was, I got the walker, which I had to use, and I proceeded to very slowly, very gingerly walk around the entire floor, the entire unit. And when I did, I asked him, okay, can I go home now? And like a good doctor, he said, no. Now, in order for you to leave, you have to be able to walk up and down a flight of stairs. And he wouldn't let me do it until the next day. But when I woke up the next day, the first thing that I did, as I'm sitting there in my dressing gown, completely naked, all wrapped up and bandaged and with tubes coming in and out of me, I proceeded to walk up and down the stairs. And after that, he did let me leave. But he gave me very strict instructions that I was not to do anything physical other than walk. And when it was appropriate and I had the green light from him, I started to walk around my neighborhood. And then over time, I quickly started walking around the community. And then very quickly over time, I started walking around the city. And then very quickly over time, I walked 20 miles in a day. Now, I know I'm not the typical patient, and I know I'm an outlier, but when I told him that I walked 20 miles, he corrected me and he said, you mean you walked 20 miles last week? And I said, no, I walked 20 miles yesterday. At which point he told me that I no longer have to see him because I am fully recovered. And then he gave me strict parameters of what I could do to recover in the future. He was very, very deliberate in his delivery of one specific line, which is that I could never run again. And after many months of doing the training that he did agree that I was able to do and getting myself into better and better shape, and focusing on my diet for the first time really ever, and focusing on things that I had never really considered before with longevity in mind, I got to a place where I felt like I was able to do many of the things that he had recommended I never do. And it occurred to me that the doctor is never going to give me permission to run. In fact, he's never going to give me permission to do anything that puts him at risk. And I don't fault him for that. The system is set up in a way where he could potentially be at risk of a lawsuit if I was the type of person who was going to blame him for anything that I did moving forward. Which, of course, is not how I roll, so I recognized and I took a calculated risk. Because I wanted to live my own life, I wanted to live the life that I knew I was capable of. In order for me to do that, I knew that I would have to defy what he had recommended, which he was pretty adamant was law. And no, not legal law, but his law in terms of preserving my hip. And I have no idea how this sounds to you, and I hope it doesn't sound like any of this was easy, but it was built on a mindset. It was built on me getting back my life. It was built on me getting back to the identity that I wanted and the life that I wanted to live. And I wasn't going to let anything stand in the way of me getting it. And because he encouraged me not to run, the first thing that I set as a goal was a 5-mile swim across the Chesapeake Bay. And I completed the 5-mile swim across Chesapeake Bay. And because I wanted to prove to myself that I could run again, I ended up running a holiday Christmas mile here in Boca Raton, and I beat my best mile time ever, despite the fact I was told I would never be able to run again. And I share this story because all of that happened roughly 10 years ago. And if I had listened to what they said, I certainly would not have the life that I have today or feel the way that I do right now. Because as I approach 50, I'm in the best shape of my life. And while I certainly can't slam a basketball anymore, what damn near 50-year-old is able to perform the same way they used to when they were younger? But I am in tremendous shape, and I'm able to do all of the things that I wasn't able to do prior to surgery. I play with my kids, I play sports, I do whatever I want to do, and I do it pain-free. And at some point in the future, I'll probably require a revision or maybe another hip replacement or God knows what other surgery is coming, but I'm not afraid of it anymore. And I know that on the other side of fear is everything you ever wanted. Or I should say, everything I ever wanted. And pain, whether it's spiritual, physical, or emotional, is actually a gift, and it will leave you once the lesson has been learned. So my message to anybody listening, if you made it this far, is have courage. Believe, have faith. You can do anything that you set your mind to with faith, courage, and action. Get into action. Create momentum. Win the day, win the week, win the year, win your life. And I hope to see you on my next video very soon.